The bravest adventure of all time. 500 years ago, Ferdinand Magellan set out to do what no one had ever done before, sail around the world. Along the way, his men wrote that they met giants on the coast of Patagonia, so tall that the Spaniards said the biggest of them only came to their waist. They crossed an unknown ocean, starved for months, and watched their captain die in battle. Yet against all odds, his crew finished the voyage, the first circumnavigation in human history. In 1519, Spain and Portugal were the two major colonial powers in the world. Portugal already controlled the sea route to India and the Spice Islands by sailing east around Africa. Spain wanted to reach those same islands by sailing west across the Atlantic. That same year, Hernán Cortés landed on the coast of Mexico and began his campaign against the Aztec Empire. While Cortés was fighting on land in the New World, another Spanish-financed expedition was preparing to try something that had never been done before: cross the entire world. The man chosen to lead that expedition was Ferdinand Magellan, a Portuguese navigator who had a falling out with his own king. He offered his services to the Spanish crown, and the Emperor Charles V gave him command of 5 ships to find a western passage through South America and reach Asia. Antonio Pigafetta was an Italian scholar and explorer who joined Magellan's expedition around the world, and it will be the main primary source for this video. In August of 1519, 5 ships departed Seville, Spain, with just under 300 men of mixed nationalities. The fleet stopped at the Canary Islands for supplies and then crossed the equator. Sailors later reported glowing blue fire on the mast during a storm, an effect known as St. Elmo's fire. Eventually, they would sight the coast of Brazil near the modern Recife region. They anchored near the coast and traded with local people for food, parrots, and cotton cloth. Pigafetta noted that they were very generous, but he also mentioned reports of ritual cannibalism among the tribes. And in early 1520, they reached a wide river mouth where the sea turned to fresh water for miles. They were near the modern-day Uruguay and Argentina. Believing it might be a passage to the Pacific, they explored it briefly and named it Rio de la Plata, the River of Silver. Finding no exit to the Western Ocean, they turned around and kept heading south along the coast. By March of 1520, the ships entered a sheltered bay now called Puerto San Julian in Argentina, and it was here that they would spend the winter. The cold was severe, supplies were low, and tensions grew between Magellan and his Spanish captains. One of them, Juan de Cartagena, the royal inspector, was appointed by the emperor. Previously in the voyage, he had already been arrested for disobedience, but during the winter, he helped organize a rebellion to overthrow Magellan. One of his captains, Mendoza, was stabbed and killed. Another one, Quesada, was captured and executed, and Cartagena was marooned on the coast with a priest and never seen again. The remaining crews surrendered, and Magellan now ruled the fleet absolutely. As winter passed, the men explored the barren coast, and one day, a giant figure appeared on the beach, tall, painted, and dancing. The following is a very long quote that explains this very interesting encounter in detail. One day, without anyone expecting it, we saw a giant who was on the shore of the sea, quite naked, and was dancing and leaping and singing. Our captain sent one of his men towards him, who he charged to sing and leap like the giant to reassure him and show him that we were friends. This he did, and immediately the sailor led the giant to a little island where the captain was waiting for him. And when he was before us, he began to be astonished and to be afraid, and he raised one finger, thinking that we came from heaven. He was so tall that the tallest of us only came to his waist. However, he was well built. When he was brought before the captain, he was clothed with the skin of a certain beast. This beast has its head and ears of the size of a mule, and the neck and body of the fashion of a camel, the legs of a deer, and the tail like that of a horse, and it neighs like a horse. And he carried in his hand a short and thick bow, with a thick cord made of the gut of the said beast. The captain caused food and drink to be given to this giant. Then they showed him some things, amongst others a steel mirror. When the giant saw himself in the mirror, he was greatly terrified, leaping backwards, and made 3 or 4 of our men fall down. These giants came one after the other, all naked, and began to leap and sing, raising one finger to heaven, and showing to our people a certain white powder made of roots of herbs, which they kept in earthen pots, and they made signs that they lived on that, and that they had nothing else to eat than this powder. Therefore our people made signs to them to come to the ship, and that we would help them carry their bundles. Then these men came, who carried only their bows in their hands, but their wives came after them, laden like donkeys, and carried their goods. These women are not as tall as the men, but they are very sufficiently large. When we saw them, we were amazed and astonished. They brought with them 4 of these little beasts, of which they make their clothing, and they led them around with a cord in the manner of dogs coupled together. While Magellan's crew camped on the coast, they claimed to keep meeting with these so-called giants. One of them, friendlier than the rest, was tall enough that when he jumped, the ground shook beneath his feet. Pigafetta wrote that he learned to say Jesus, Ave Maria, and Juan, and was baptized under that name. 2 weeks later, 4 more giants appeared, and the Spaniards lured them back with trinkets, and then they captured 2 of them, putting shackles on them, with the intentions of taking them back to Spain as living curiosities. When the giants realized that the shackles were permanent, they roared with fury, shouting to their god, Setebos, for help. That name and the god of the giants, Setebos, would later be immortalized by Shakespeare in his work, The Tempest. The other giants would try to escape and chaos broke out. The Spaniards fought with crossbows and guns, but the giants were incredibly fast, faster than horses, according to Pigafetta, and hard to hit. One Spaniard was killed by an arrow, after which the survivors burned the giants' camp. Pigafetta noted that the giants were fiercely protective of their wives, living as nomads in hide tents, and survived on raw meats and roots. He also recorded some interesting medical customs. When they were sick, they forced themselves to vomit by swallowing arrows. For headaches, they cut their own foreheads and limbs to let the bad blood out. Magellan called these people Patagonia, from which the name Patagonia comes. These men that Pigafetta called giants were likely the Tehuelche people of southern Patagonia. Many of these men averaged around 6 feet tall, noticeably larger than the average European sailor of the 1500s, and a lot taller than most natives throughout the Americas. However, the chronicler Antonio Pigafetta wrote that the tallest of us reached only to his waist. Whether he was exaggerating or the expedition really did encounter a 7-foot-plus giant human being remains one of history's greatest curiosities. Whatever they saw, the meeting left such an impression that for centuries afterwards, maps marked this region as the land of giants. By August 1520, the ice melted and the fleet prepared to sail again. They raised a wooden cross on the hill above Port San Julian, claiming the land for Spain, and continued south through the rough seas and freezing wind. In October of 1520, an opening was seen between 2 high cliffs. The channel ran deep and narrow with mountains capped in snow on both sides. Magellan named this the Cape of Virgins, after the feast day on which it was discovered. He ordered the fleet to enter. Strong tides swept them through twisting inlets, bordered by glaciers and dark forests of cypress and cedar. They dropped anchor where they could, tying thick ropes to trees because the water was too deep for anchors to hold. Magellan sent 2 ships, San Antonio and the Concepcion, ahead to look for an exit. When they disappeared for 2 days, everyone thought they were lost. Then, on the 3rd day, they returned under full sail, firing cannons and shouting that they had found the way out into the western sea. The men cheered and wept with relief. Magellan named the farthest point Cape Desire. He had found the connection between the Atlantic and Pacific Ocean. But one of the ships, the San Antonio, decided that they had had enough. Its Spanish crew, led by the pilot Estavo Gomez, refused to follow Magellan any further. Under the cover of darkness, they fled back through the straits and returned to Spain. Magellan never saw them again. After 38 days of navigation through the channel, the remaining 3 ships emerged into a calm, endless expanse of blue water. This was the Pacific Ocean. He had no idea how vast it really was. They sailed west for 3 months and 20 days without sighting land. There were no storms, but also no wind to push them and no ports to resupply. The food ran out. The crew ate old biscuits full of worms and drank yellow, foul-smelling water. They boiled strips of oxide from the rigging just to have something to chew. Rats on the ship became extremely valuable, and sickness started to spread. Pigafetta described men's gums swelling until they could not eat. 19 died and 20 more were crippled by scurvy. Those who survived could barely stand. Despite the misery, Magellan refused to turn back. He ordered daily prayers and promised that land could not be that far away, but the ocean stretched on without end. They had crossed what would later be recognized as nearly 1/3 of the planet's circumference. At night, the sky blazed with stars, unfamiliar to European eyes. Pigafetta noted a pattern of 5 bright points forming a cross, what we now call the Southern Cross constellation. It was one of the first written descriptions of it by the Europeans. By early March 1521, the men were near death when the lookout cried land. They had reached a small chain of islands in the western Pacific. the Mariana Islands near Guam. For the first time in months, they saw trees, birds, and people. Canoes would soon surround the ship. The islanders traded coconuts, bananas, and fished for bits of iron and cloth. But these people would soon steal one of their small boats. Magellan, desperate and furious, ordered a raid. His men burned several huts and killed a few of their islanders before recovering the boats. Pigafetta would later call this place the Island of Thieves. It was a harsh introduction to the Western Pacific, but it also meant survival. Fresh food and water revived the crew just enough to keep sailing. Magellan turned southwest, following his charts toward a group of larger islands ahead, the Philippines. In March of 1521, they sighted land again, Samar Island, part of the Philippine archipelago. The air was humid, but the people were friendly. After nearly 4 months of ocean and death, they had completed the first crossing of the Pacific. They were still suffering from scurvy. Magellan ordered tents built on the beach for the sick, and the men began to recover. On March 31st, Easter Sunday, the expedition's priests led a celebration and the first Catholic Mass ever held in the Philippines. Both the Spaniards and the island's leaders attended, kneeling before a wooden cross. Cannons were fired from the ships in salute. The local rulers promised friendship and agreed to guide Magellan to a larger and wealthier island called Cebu. In April of 1521, the fleet entered the harbor of Cebu City. It was crowded with canoes and wooden houses built on stilts over the water. The island's king, Raja Humabon, first demanded a trading tax, which was a local custom. But Magellan's interpreter, a Malay man named Enrique, told him that the Spanish emperor sought friendship, not tribute. Gifts were exchanged and the two leaders became allies. In April of 1521, this island king, his queen, and more than 800 islanders were baptized into Christianity. The king took a new name, Don Carlos, after the Spanish emperor, and the queen was named Juana. Magellan presented her with a small statue of the Christ child, a gift that would later become the famous Santo Niño of Cebu. For a brief time, everything went perfectly. The Spaniards believed they had found loyal allies, seeing themselves as both explorers and missionaries. But across the channel from Cebu was Mactan Island, ruled by a local chief named Lapu-Lapu. He refused to recognize their authority or to accept Spanish control. When Magellan heard this, he decided to make an example of him. In April of 1521, 60 heavily armed Spaniards landed on the beach of Mactan. The tide was low, forcing them to wade through shallows before they could reach land, and waiting for them were more than 1,000 island warriors. Arrows and bamboo spears started to rain down. The Spaniards' muskets and crossbows fired, but the range was too short to stop the charge. Magellan ordered the huts to be burned to frighten the enemy, but the winds carried the flames the wrong way. The islanders counterattacked, focusing on the unprotected legs of the armored men. A spear would strike Magellan in the leg, and he stumbled. Soon another blow hit his arm, and a sword cut deep into his thigh. Moments later, he was struck down in the surf. Magellan's journey was over, dead at the age of 41. The survivors burned one of the vessels, the Concepcion, because there was too few men to sail it. 2 ships remained, the Trinidad and Victoria. Of the 265 men that had left Spain, only 120 were still alive. They crossed the equator again and steered toward eastern Indonesia. These were the Spice Islands that had been their goal from the beginning. In November of 1521, the ships dropped anchor at Tidore, one of the volcanic islands in eastern Indonesia. The local ruler, Sultan al-Mansur, welcomed them warmly. He said that he had a dream that white-winged ships would come from the west. For the exhausted Spaniards, it was a miracle. They had finally arrived where the world's most valuable spices grew. They collected cloves, nutmeg, and cinnamon, trading everything they had left, cloth, iron, and even ship parts for the spices. Pigafetta wrote that 10 yards of cloth could buy 400 pounds of cloves. The air of the island smelled of wood smoke and spice. But the Trinidad, Magellan's flagship, began to leak badly. Her timbers, eaten by shipworms, could no longer hold pressure. After failing to repair the boat, the crew decided to leave her behind for overhaul, while the smaller ship Victoria sailed home. They set out westward across the Indian Ocean, carrying 26 tons of cloves, worth more than the entire cost of the voyage. The Victoria sailed west under constant threat of storms and Portuguese patrols. They could not stop at any port, since Portugal claimed all the lands along the route. The crew steered deep into the open ocean, taking a southerly course toward the Cape of Good Hope. Half the crew died of starvation and exhaustion. Those who survived rationed rice by the spoonful and collected rainwater from the cells. But by May of 1522, they had rounded the Cape, the first ship in history to circle the globe that far. They eventually reached the Cape Verde Islands off of West Africa, a Portuguese colony. They were out of food, and they decided to risk a landing. A small boat was sent ashore, disguised as a Portuguese trading vessel to buy rice and meat, but when local officials realized that this was Magellan's ship, they arrested the people on shore. The Victoria immediately fled under full sail, leaving 13 men captured behind. With barely enough crew to steer the boat, they continued north toward home. And in September of 1522, after almost 3 years at sea, the Victoria reached Spain. The masts were barely standing, the hull of the ship was covered in black mold, the sails were torn. 265 men departed Spain to cross the entire world. Only 18 Europeans and 3 Asian crewmen were still alive, completing the first circumnavigation of Earth. The survivors eventually reached Seville. They walked barefoot into the church of Santa Maria de la Victoria, each carrying a candle, and gave thanks for their survival. Behind them, dock workers unloaded the cargo, 381 sacks of cloves. That single load repaid every debt of the expedition and proved that the planet could indeed be circled. The Victoria's surviving captain, Juan Sebastián Elcano, and the chronicler Antonio Pigafetta were received by Emperor Charles V. Pigafetta later presented the emperor with his written accounts of the voyage, an extraordinary first-hand record that described everything from the Giants of Patagonia to the death of Magellan. The expedition had taken 3 years and covered more than 42,000 miles. Though Magellan never lived to complete it, his vision and leadership made it possible. The sailors had proved to humanity that the entire globe was linked by a continuous ocean. Thanks so much for watching my videos. I have a members only channel where you can find exclusive video content. With the upcoming Christmas season, check out your home state map at Mirway Maps using my link. They got 3D maps, relief maps, and this awesome national park map right here. Check that out at Mirway Maps with the link in my bio. Please like and subscribe, and thank you so much for watching my videos. I got more coming. Stay tuned, ring that notification bell, and take care.